He agreed to marry one starving woman and ended up sheltering 3 hunted Apache sisters. Dust swirled across the dying sun as Caleb Vance, a quiet ex-scout turned rancher, hammered the last fence post into the cracked Arizona soil. All he wanted was silence, land, and no more blood. But when 3 women appeared at his gate barefoot, bruised, and desperate, the war he'd buried inside himself rose again. The eldest, Sana, spoke first, her voice trembling but proud. "You promised to take one wife. We come together, or we die together." Caleb remembered the deal: 1 woman for safety and work, nothing more. He hadn't agreed to 3. But behind those dark eyes he saw hunger, terror, and something else: faith in him. Turning them away meant signing their death. Keeping them meant painting a target on his own land. That night, as the desert wind screamed through the fence line, Caleb stared into the fire, his rifle across his knees. Somewhere out there, the men who'd owned those sisters were coming, and they would burn the world to reclaim them. He swore he'd left violence behind, but some promises are heavier than bullets. Now the question isn't if those men will find his ranch, it's who Caleb will become when they do. Will he fight to protect 3 strangers who never asked for his mercy, or watch another piece of his soul die in silence? The morning sun crawled over the red cliffs of the Arizona territory, spilling harsh light across Caleb Vance's ranch, a lonely stretch of land surrounded by dust, wire, and silence. The cabin stood half-finished, its timbers gray and splintered by years of Sunday. A single horse grazed near the corral, ribs showing through its hide. Nothing about the place spoke of comfort, only survival. Caleb moved through his routine like a ghost, feeding the horse, checking the fences, counting the cattle that remained after the last drought. He was a man of habit, of rules carved from loss. The war had taken his family, the frontier had taken his peace, and now the land threatened to take what was left of his faith. Then came the sound that didn't belong: footsteps in the dirt, light but unsure. 3 silhouettes stood beyond the gate, framed by the white blaze of morning. The eldest, Sana, tall and defiant despite exhaustion, kept her chin high. Beside her, Taya, eyes sharp as flint, watched every move Caleb made. The youngest, Lona, barely more than a girl, clung to her sister's dress, trembling from fear and cold. Their clothes were torn from travel, their faces streaked with sand and bruises. When Caleb asked where they came from, Sana's answer was simple, almost whispered: "From the men who sell women." The words hit harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, Caleb felt something other than weariness, rage, buried deep under guilt. He didn't know yet that by opening his gate to them, he wasn't just giving shelter, he was inviting back everything he'd tried to bury. That night, the desert turned black and merciless. Wind rattled the loose shutters, and the fire inside Caleb's cabin burned low, throwing crooked light over the faces of the 3 sisters huddled near the hearth. They hadn't eaten a full meal in days. The youngest, Lona, whispered something in Apache, a word that sounded like home, before falling asleep with her head on Sana's lap. Caleb sat across the room, silent, his revolver resting near his boot. Every instinct told him to stay detached, to keep this temporary. Tomorrow he'd take them to town, hand them over to the mission, and return to his quiet routine. That was the plan. But plans didn't hold up long in the West. When Sana spoke, her voice carried a calm that didn't match the tremor in her hands. "You think we safe here?" she asked. Caleb looked up. "For the night." Her eyes didn't leave his. "They come soon. Men who say they own us. They have horses, guns, money. We have nothing." The words clawed at him. He saw flashes, bodies in uniform, firelight on bayonets, women screaming during raids he could never stop. The old ghost stirred again, heavy with shame. He tried to end it there, standing up, reaching for his coat. But then Taya's voice cut through, low and raw. "If you send us away, they kill her first." She pointed to her sleeping sister. Caleb froze. Something in him shifted, not pity, but recognition. He'd once seen that same helpless look in the mirror, and in that moment, the quiet man who had sworn never to fight again made a silent promise he didn't yet understand. He wouldn't let the past repeat, not here, not on his land. The days that followed blurred into something between survival and uneasy peace. Caleb repaired the barn roof, fixed the corral gate, and kept his distance from the women at least. That was what he told himself. But distance was difficult when 3 lives moved like shadows through every corner of his land. Sana took to cleaning the cabin, slow and precise, as if rebuilding a sense of order could erase the years of violation. Taya mended the tools without asking permission, stubbornly proving she wasn't helpless. Lona tended the horse, whispering to it in their native tongue, her laughter faint but startling, the first sound of life that ranch had heard in months. Caleb watched them from the porch, coffee cooling in his hand. They worked like people who'd learned never to waste motion, never to wait for kindness. He respected that, but the unease in him grew each time he caught sight of the horizon, afraid that at any moment it would spit out riders, men who believed the sisters were still theirs to claim. By the 3rd evening, he heard hooves. He was out of the chair before he even thought, rifle in hand, shadow long against the fading light. A single horse approached from the north trail, a neighbor, Jeb Carter, young and talkative, the kind who knew too much. "Evenin', Vance," Jeb called, drawing his reins near the gate. "Heard you've got company up here, 3 Apache gals?" Caleb kept his expression steady. "You heard wrong." "Maybe," Jeb said, eyes narrowing. "Town's talkin'. Some trader from Santa Fe's been spreading word about missing property, says he's lookin' for what's his." Caleb's hand tightened on the rifle stock. "Ain't nothing on this land belongs to him." Jeb gave a slow grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You're a decent man, Caleb, but decent men die fast when they start picking sides." When the rider left, dust swirling behind him, Caleb felt the weight of what was coming. He turned toward the cabin. Inside, Sana stood near the window, her jaw tight. She'd heard every word. "They know," she said simply. He nodded. "Yeah, they know." The next morning came pale and windless. Caleb rose early, checked his rifles, and split kindling while the sisters prepared a simple breakfast: bread, beans, and silence. The air inside the cabin was thick, full of questions no one wanted to ask. Finally, Lona spoke. "We should leave." Sana turned sharply. "Leave to where?" "The land full of men like them." "We bring danger," Taya said bitterly, looking at Caleb. "They burn this place for us." Caleb leaned on the axe, breathing slow. "Then we build something they can't burn." The sisters stared at him, unsure if he was serious. But he was already gathering tools, wire, and nails. "If they're comin', we make 'em pay for every step." All day, they worked side by side. Sana and Taya helped reinforce the barn doors, driving nails through extra planks. Lona stacked firewood near the cabin, humming under her breath despite the fear tightening her chest. Caleb set traps along the outer fence, small, simple alarms made of wire and tin, the kind soldiers used when they didn't want to be surprised. By sunset, they were exhausted. The land stretched red and endless, shadows bleeding across the dirt. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and quiet defiance. Sana approached him by the well, hands raw from labor. "Why help us?" she asked. Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at her, the faint bruises at her collarbone, the pride that refused to bend. "Because I didn't help before," he said finally. "And I can't live with that again." She studied his face, searching for deceit. Finding none, she nodded once. "Then we stand with you." That night, a soft rain fell, rare mercy in the desert, but it couldn't wash away what hung in the air. Caleb couldn't sleep. He sat at the table cleaning his rifle while the sisters dozed near the fire. When lightning cracked far off, he saw their faces in brief flashes, the calm before chaos. Suddenly, a metallic rattle echoed from outside. He froze. One of the tin alarms. He moved fast, silent, slipping out the door with the rifle drawn. The wind hissed across the field. In the distance, he saw faint shapes moving near the far fence riders, 2 of them scouting. Caleb crouched low, watching through the darkness. He could have fired, but he didn't. They weren't attacking yet, they were measuring. He let them ride off, memorizing their direction. When he returned inside, Sana was awake, knife in hand, eyes wide. "They're close," he said. She nodded, voice steady. "Then we prepare." Morning broke with no sign of the scouts, but tension hung heavy. The sisters didn't talk much. They moved like soldiers, efficient, deliberate. Taya checked the rifle he'd taught her to use. Sana boiled water and laid out clean cloth, ready for wounds that hadn't happened yet. Lona gathered bandages, though her hands trembled. Caleb watched them, feeling the strange, fierce pride of a man who'd found something worth defending. Around midday, hoofbeats thundered again, louder, closer, and not stopping. "Inside," he barked. They ducked behind the windows. Dust clouds rose beyond the ridge. 6 riders, armed. The lead man wore a black duster, his hat low, grin cruel. Graham Lowe, the trader who'd sold and hunted women for years. Caleb recognized him. They'd crossed paths in another lifetime, back when Caleb still carried a badge. "Well, I'll be damned," Lowe called, reining in near the gate. Didn't think the great Caleb Vance had turned into a savior of whores. Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle across his arms. "Turn around, Lowe." The man laughed. "Not without what's mine. You signed for one of 'em. Means they all belong to me." "They belong to no one." Lowe's grin faltered. "You really want to die for them?" Caleb's answer came low and clear. "Better than living like you." Silence. Then movement. One of the riders raised his gun. Caleb fired first. The shot echoed like thunder. The man dropped from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. Chaos exploded. Bullets shredded the air, splintering wood, kicking dust. The sisters ducked, screaming as Caleb dove inside. "Down," he shouted. "Stay behind the hearth." Taya grabbed the spare rifle and fired blind through the window, her aim rough but brave. Sana reloaded for her, hands steady even as tears streaked her face. Lona clutched the knife Caleb had given her, praying under her breath. The gunfight raged for what felt like hours but lasted minutes. When silence finally fell, smoke curled from the porch posts, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the cabin. 2 riders lay dead in the yard. The others had fled, their leader shouting curses into the wind. Caleb staggered to the doorway, chest heaving, arm bleeding from a graze. "They'll come back," Sana said softly behind him. "I know," he breathed. She stepped closer. "Then we finish what they start." Over the next 2 days, they fortified everything. The barn became a fortress, the corral a barricade. The sisters learned how to load rifles, how to move without sound, how to fight with purpose. But the hardest battle was inside the cabin, between Caleb's guilt and his growing attachment. Late one night, when the desert was still and the stars burned bright, Sana sat by the fire sewing a torn sleeve. "You fear losing us," she said quietly. He looked up from cleaning his gun. "I fear losing myself again." "Maybe both same thing," she said. He didn't argue. When her hand brushed his as she passed him a cup of coffee, he didn't pull away. For the first time, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like understanding. The final assault came at dawn. Caleb was already awake when he heard the low thunder of hooves, many this time. Dust rose like smoke on the horizon. "Get ready," he said, voice calm. The sisters took their places. Taya by the window. Sana near the door. Lona at the hearth, reloading shells with shaking fingers. The first bullets hit the cabin walls like hail. Caleb returned fire, methodical, precise. One man fell, then another. But they kept coming. Taya shouted something in Apache, a warning, and ducked as a bullet shattered the window frame. Caleb grabbed her shoulder, pulling her back. "Stay low." Smoke filled the room. The air was deafening, horses screaming, men cursing, rifles cracking. Then came the sound he dreaded, the barn door crashing open. They were flanking. Caleb ran out before the sisters could stop him. Dust blinded him as he fired, ducked, rolled behind the water trough. He caught Lowe on the far side, aiming straight at the cabin. "You can't save 'em all, Vance," Lowe roared. Caleb fired once. Lowe ducked and returned, the bullet grazing Caleb's ribs. Pain seared through him. But he kept moving, closing the distance, until the 2 men met in the dirt. They fought bare-handed, brutal and desperate. Fists, elbows, grit. Lowe's knife flashed. Caleb caught his wrist, slammed it against the trough, and twisted until bones snapped. "You think they're yours," Caleb snarled, forcing the blade to the man's throat. "They were never yours to own." Lowe spat blood. "You'll die for nothing." "Maybe," Caleb said and drove the knife home. When it was over, the field was silent. The remaining riders fled, their courage dissolving in the sunrise. Caleb staggered, blood soaking his shirt. Sana and her sisters ran to him, faces pale. "You hurt," Lona cried. He shook his head weakly. "Just tired." "Vin." Sana caught him before he fell, her voice trembling. "You fool, man, you save us." He smiled faintly. "No, you saved yourselves. I just stood beside you." They helped him inside, bandaged his side, and waited as the morning light crept through the cracks of the cabin, pale, calm, alive. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't feel alone. When the sheriff finally arrived 2 days later, he found bodies buried and silence hanging heavy over the ranch. The women stood together by the porch, and Caleb sat nearby, bandaged but breathing. "You did right," the sheriff said quietly. "But there'll be talk." "There's always talk," Caleb replied. The lawman tipped his hat and rode off, leaving them to the land the way people did when words weren't enough. As the sun dipped low, the sisters went about their work tending horses, mending fences, building life from wreckage. Sana stood beside Caleb, her hand brushing his. "We stay," she said softly. "We earn peace here." He looked at her, at all three of them, and for once didn't argue. Because in this broken stretch of desert, peace wasn't given, it was fought for. And they had earned every inch of it. For a while the desert seemed to rest. Weeks passed without gunfire, without riders on the ridge. The air turned dry again, and the ranch began to breathe slowly, warily, like a wounded animal learning to trust the quiet. Caleb's wounds healed, though the scar along his ribs still burned at night. He refused to let the sisters see him limp. He spent each day fixing fences, teaching them small things: how to saddle the horse, how to mend wire, how to read tracks in the sand. The land that once felt like a graveyard began to sound like life again. The scrape of a shovel, the steady rhythm of hammer on wood, the low hum of Lona singing while she worked. Still, peace on the frontier never came without a debt. One afternoon, as Caleb hauled hay toward the barn, he saw dust lifting on the horizon. A single rider, not fast, not hostile, just deliberate. The sight froze his breath. He reached for his rifle out of instinct. When the figure came closer, the wind carried a familiar silhouette: Jeb Carter. But this time, his face wasn't friendly. His eyes were restless, darting like a man carrying bad news, or worse, bad choices. "Afternoon, Caleb," Jeb said, swinging off his horse. "Heard some talk in town. Seems word of your guests has reached farther south." Caleb stayed still. "How far?" "Far enough that a bounty's on their heads," Jeb muttered. $500 for each girl, dead or alive." "No." The silence that followed was heavy as a storm cloud. "I didn't tell them nothing," Jeb went on, "but others might. You can't stay out here. They'll come again, not for justice, for money." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then let them come." Jeb looked at him with something close to pity. "You can't win this, friend. There's too many. Sell the land. Leave while you can." Caleb's answer was simple. "This land's not for sale. Neither are they." Jeb sighed, shook his head, and rode off, dust trailing behind him like a warning that didn't need repeating. When Caleb returned to the cabin, Sana was waiting at the door. She didn't ask. She already knew. "They put price on us?" He nodded once. Taya slammed her fist against the wall, voice trembling. "They hunt us like animals again." "Not this time," Caleb said. "We fight smart. We move supplies, hide the horses, set traps near the ravine." Sana studied him for a long moment. "You fight for us again, but what if it kills you?" He looked at her with calm resolve. "Then you'll know someone died for something, not because of it." That night, a cold wind swept through the plains. Caleb sat awake by the dying fire, his thoughts circling the same question. How long could they keep running from a world that refused to let them live? Sana stirred from sleep, saw him sitting there, and crossed the floor quietly. She sat across from him, her face dimly lit by flame. "You think we cursed," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, you're proof there's still good worth bleeding for." "Riston." She hesitated, then reached into the small pouch she always kept tied around her neck. From it, she pulled a thin silver medallion, Apache made, engraved with the symbol of endurance, a sun trapped in a circle. My father's, she whispered. He died protecting us. Now I give it to you. Caleb's throat tightened. I can't. You already did, she interrupted gently, placing it in his palm. You fight like him. You see people, not what world calls them. Mo. Their eyes met, and something shifted deeper than gratitude, quieter than love. A wordless promise, the kind made only between survivors. 3 nights later, the ranch awoke to distant thunder, not weather, but hooves. Caleb rushed outside. The sky burned red from campfires miles away. Through his spyglass he saw them. A group of armed riders setting camp across the ridge. Dozens. They weren't coming fast this time. They were waiting. Aziga. He hurried back inside. They're here. Taya gripped the rifle. How many? Too many for guns alone. Sana's eyes were steady. Then we make them afraid. By dawn, the sisters and Caleb had turned the ranch into a maze of defense buckets of sand near windows, boards nailed over weak spots, ropes stretched across the yard to trip horses. Caleb placed the silver medallion Sana had given him around his neck and muttered something like a prayer, though he hadn't prayed in years. When the riders came, they came slow, like wolves testing a fence line. Their leader wasn't low, he was dead, but his brother Merrick, worse in cruelty and smarter in patience. He reined his horse near the gate, his men fanning out behind him. Vance, he shouted. You killed my blood. I'll burn your land till the sand turns black. Caleb stood firm, rifle steady. Then you'd better start with me. Merrick smirked. That's the plan. The first bullet screamed past Caleb's ear. He fired back, hitting one rider clean off his saddle. The air filled with smoke, dust, and thunder. Inside the cabin, Taya and Lona ducked behind the hearth, firing through small gaps in the wall. Sana kept close to the door, eyes sharp, knife ready for anyone who came too near. For hours, the standoff raged. Bullets tore through wood. Heat built inside the cabin. Lona cried once when splinters cut her arm, but Taya covered her, whispering, Breathe, sister, we not die today. Then silence. Too long, too sudden. Caleb leaned toward the window and saw movement at the barn. Merrick had circled half his men behind it. They were setting it on fire. He ran out before Sana could stop him. Smoke roared upward, horses screaming. Caleb grabbed a wet sack and tried to smother the flames, but a gunshot split the air. The bullet hit his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Caleb! Sana's scream cut through the chaos. She ran out, knife flashing, ducking behind barrels as bullets tore splinters beside her. She reached him, dragged him toward cover while Taya and Lona fired from the windows to cover them. Blood soaked through Caleb's sleeve. Get inside, he gasped. Not without you. Another shot. The air shuddered. One of Merrick's men fell. Lona's bullet had found its mark. They stumbled back into the cabin. Caleb collapsed against the wall, face pale, breathing shallow. We can't win, Taya said, panic breaking her voice. Too many. Sana met her eyes, fierce and steady. Then we don't win. We survive. She tore fabric, pressed it to Caleb's wound, then turned to Lona. You remember what he teach the ravine path? Lona nodded through tears. Go, Sana ordered. Hide there until dark. No, the girl pleaded. I stay. You go. Caleb tried to speak, but pain stole his voice. He gripped Sana's hand weakly. You, all go. Don't die here for me. Me. Sana's eyes glistened. You fight for us. Now we fight for you. She kissed his forehead brief, trembling, then rose, knife in hand. Outside, the fire spread, and Merrick's men advanced. Sana slipped out through the smoke, moving low along the fence line. Taya followed, rifle slung across her back. They flanked from the side, using the rising wind and burning hay to their advantage. When Merrick's men reached the porch, gunfire exploded again, not from the cabin, but behind them. Sana fired first. One man fell, then another. Confusion erupted. Merrick turned his horse, shouting orders. In that split second, Caleb forced himself upright inside the cabin. Blood blurred his vision, but he saw the shadow of Merrick's hat through the smoke and he fired. The bullet struck Merrick square in the chest. He dropped, dust exploding around him. The rest of his men scattered, some fleeing, some dropping their weapons. The fire ate what was left of their courage. When the smoke cleared, the yard was silent except for the crackle of burning wood and the faint cry of a wounded horse. Sana limped back, face streaked with ash and tears. Taya followed, one arm bleeding. Caleb was on the porch, pale but alive, his rifle across his lap. He looked at them with something between disbelief and reverence. "You came back," he rasped. Sana smiled faintly. "You think we run?" He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "I should have known better." "No." They helped him inside as the fire burned out. Dawn broke gray and exhausted, stretching over a land that had bled enough. Days later, the ranch stood half in ruined blackened boards, bullet holes, silence. But they were alive, and life, out here, was victory enough. Caleb's wound began to heal. The sisters took turns caring for him, patching the walls, feeding the animals, planting new seeds. For the first time, the place felt less like a hiding spot and more like a home. One evening, as the sky turned copper, Sana brought him a cup of coffee and sat beside him on the porch. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Caleb said, "When I found you that night, I thought I was saving strangers. And now?" He looked toward the horizon, where the wind moved soft through the grass. "Now I know you saved me." Sana's eyes softened. "Then maybe we both live for something new." The sound of laughter drifted from the barn, Taya teasing Lona, their voices bright against the quiet. For the first time, the ranch didn't sound haunted. Still, the world outside wasn't done testing them. Far south, the bounty still existed. Men who'd lost gold and pride would come again someday. But for now, under the pale desert sun, they had peace, fragile, real, and earned. Caleb glanced at the silver medallion hanging from his neck. He closed his hand around it, feeling its warmth from the Sunday. "You ever think," he said quietly, "maybe some people are meant to be found twice, once by the world, and once by mercy?" Sana looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then mercy found us all." And as the sun sank behind the red cliffs, painting the land in blood and gold, the desert seemed to exhale as if, for the first time, it forgave. Spring crept in quietly, softening the hard edges of the land that had nearly destroyed them. The fields, once barren, now showed thin blades of green, and the cattle that survived the chaos wandered the pasture like ghosts returned from the grave. The smoke scars on the barn faded, and so did the fear that had lived in every breath they took. Caleb Vance moved slower now. His shoulder healed poorly, but he didn't complain. Each morning he walked the perimeter fence with his coffee in hand, watching the sisters work, Sana mending a gate, Taya feeding the horses, Lona laughing at the chickens that never obeyed. The sight filled him with something he hadn't felt in years: quiet purpose. Sometimes he caught himself thinking that peace felt wrong, as if the world had forgotten to collect its debt. But then Sana would meet his eyes from across the corral, and the thought would fade like dust in wind. One evening after supper, the four of them sat outside as the sun bled red behind the mountains. The air smelled of sage and wood smoke. "We fix fence tomorrow," Taya said, breaking the silence. "Then roof of barn, still many holes." Caleb nodded, smiling faintly. "You sound like a ranch foreman." She smirked. "Better than you." Even Sana laughed, soft and real, the sound of someone who'd forgotten how to laugh until it returned on its own. As the stars came out, Lona leaned her head against Sana's shoulder. "We safe now?" she asked. Sana looked to Caleb before answering. "We safe today." Caleb lifted his gaze to the horizon. "And sometimes, today's enough." The desert wind picked up, cool and forgiving. Later that night, when the sisters had gone inside, Caleb sat alone on the porch, polishing the old revolver he swore he'd never use again. The silver medallion hung against his chest, warm from the firelight. He heard the door creak. Sana stepped out, wrapped in a wool shawl, her hair loose and dark against the fading light. She stood beside him, saying nothing for a while. "You still wait for trouble," she said quietly. He smiled without looking at her. "Habit dies slow. Lo, maybe habit keeps us alive." She paused. "But not forever." He turned toward her, eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. "What do you mean?" You fight world every day, she said, voice steady. But one day, you must live in it again. Caleb stared at the horizon where moonlight touched the dry hills. Maybe this is my way of living. Sana stepped closer, her hand brushing the sleeve of his shirt, a touch so light he might have imagined it. Then don't live it alone. Zine. He looked down at her hand, roughened by work but strong. Slowly, he covered it with his own. For a long time, they just stood there, no promises, no vows. Only two survivors breathing in the same rhythm beneath a sky too wide to measure. By dawn, the sound of a hammer rang through the yard again. Lona was already awake, gathering kindling. Taya chased the stubborn rooster from the water trough. Sana poured coffee, handing a cup to Caleb as he emerged from the cabin. You ever think about leaving? He asked suddenly. Sana tilted her head. Leave to where? He shrugged. Anywhere that ain't haunted by what we did. She smiled faintly. All land haunted. Better to haunt it together. That. He chuckled, a rare sound, low and tired but genuine. You've got an answer for everything. Not everything, she said. Only the parts that matter. Behind them, the sun rose golden and fierce, burning away the chill. Their ranch now glowed with the soft promise of something earned through blood and mercy. The world might never call them heroes, or even remember their names. But out here, in the quiet heart of the desert, they'd written their own kind of law. No one owns another soul. No one runs forever. And sometimes, survival is the miracle. Caleb lifted his hat against the light. We've got fences to mend, he said. Sana nodded, smiling as the wind caught her hair. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about the men who might return, or the ghosts of war that haunted his sleep. He was thinking about the sound of laughter in his home, about 3 women who refused to be broken, and about a life he never meant to build, but couldn't imagine losing. The prairie stretched endless before them, wild and merciful, as if daring them to begin again. And together, they did. Months later, the land bloomed where blood once fell. Wildflowers rose along the fence line, yellow and defiant against the dust. The storms came and went, but the house still stood its patched roof, a quiet monument to the hands that refused to surrender. Caleb Vance rarely spoke of that night anymore. The scars on his shoulder told the story well enough. When strangers passed through the valley, they sometimes saw him riding the ridge at dawn, a tall figure with a weathered hat, his rifle strapped to the saddle, and 3 women tending the fields below. They never asked questions. They just nodded the way men did when they recognized something sacred but wordless. The sisters changed too. Taya smiled more now, though she'd never admit it. Her sharpness had softened into humor. Lona, no longer afraid of her own voice, sang as she worked, her song carrying across the prairie like a prayer. And Sana, she was still the storm and the calm together. Her strength no longer came from fear, it came from choice. One evening, as the sunset burned copper across the horizon, Caleb found her standing at the edge of the corral, watching the sky. In her hand, the wind tugged at the same silver medallion she had once given him. You should keep it, he said softly. She turned, eyes reflecting the fading light. No, she whispered. It belongs where courage lives now. She reached out, fastening it around his neck again. You keep it, Caleb, to remember who we were, and what we became. He looked at her for a long time, the desert wind threading between them. No vows, no words, just quiet understanding between 2 people who had walked through hell and built a home on its ashes. Behind them, the sisters called from the porch, laughter breaking the stillness. Sana smiled, the corners of her eyes softening. Caleb tipped his hat and murmured, Come on then, sun's going down fast. As they walked back toward the cabin, the light fell over the ranch like a final blessing. The prairie stretched endless and golden, not empty anymore, filled with the sound of life rebuilding itself. Because out here, redemption wasn't found in churches or prayers. It was forged in fire, earned in blood, and held together by human hands that refused to let go. And for Caleb Vance and the 3 sisters he once saved, that was enough.